All right, so an interesting, sequence of thoughts occurred to me today as, we're reading a book. It's called To Love Is to Be Happy With. I don't remember exactly, what was being discussed in it, but it made me have some thoughts because in the book he, talks about, when people mistake their needs for wants, or the disempowering quality of stating something as a need, when it really is a want. So he basically steers people away from using the word need because it sort of, it undermines essentially, their happiness, because when you state something as a need, it is implied that your survival depends on it. So, a lot of things that we want, well, our, survival doesn't necessarily depend on it. So, why create that unhappiness in relationship to our wants and our desires? Why do we, stand back and tap our feet, pouting until the time that, at some point, hopefully something of what we wanted is given to us. So anyhow, he doesn't like the word need. So, but that made me sort of think about, what is it that a need really is? And so I wanted to play around with this idea of how perhaps a need could be interpreted. So to put this into simple terms, I'll start off with, what is, the early on, as babies, when we're a baby, what is it that a baby does when it, quote unquote, needs something? It cries. So then, the parent comes in and it tries to interpret, what is it that the baby wants or / needs. So the baby wants / needs milk. So then we give the baby milk. So most of us feel comfortable saying that, what the baby needed was milk. All right, I'm going to pause it here. All right. So, yeah, most of us would be comfortable with saying, well, what the baby needed was milk. And, the parents provided them this milk, so the baby was dependent on the parents to provide it with its needs. Now I'm going to challenge this a little bit. I'm going to say what the baby needed was within the baby itself. The baby, what the best thing the baby could do to meet its need was to cry. So what the baby really needed was to cry. Okay, we got more people here, so I'll pause it again. All right, I'll reiterate. So what the baby needs to do in order to get what it wants is to cry. Now what it needs is to cry. So I'm distinguishing what is a need and what is a want. Well, the baby needs to listen to its own body, to make a decision to do something. God damn it. So what I'm saying is, what it is outside of us in our environment that we want. Like the baby wants milk, but what it needs to do is essentially assert its own will, its power, in order to get what it wants. So the need exists within whatever it is the baby can do in order to receive what it wants. So, in relationships, we often find ourselves tethering our needs to other people. And then we get disappointed, when they don't meet them. But what we really need to do is to be in our body and to take responsibility for what it is that our body is calling to. That is our need. Our need exists within whatever it is that is speaking to us. Our desire, for our community, for our family, for our friends, for our, husband or wife, to meet, to agree with those needs, that is actually a want. And so whenever we decide that I need this from this person, we're creating a recipe for resentment, because we can only really give when we have when we have a surplus. So whether or not, and when we have a surplus in a relationship, we happily give. So when we don't have a surplus to give, then we can no longer give happily or at all. And then our partner may, in whatever area of life, may fail. And then we're unhappy. Well, why didn't they, do what they say they were going to do? Well, it's like, because it's always a gamble. Whatever it is that we want, if we recognize it, that when we receive it, that's a gift. And that when we want it, that's a gamble. So it is on us to always be the marksman, using our own tool. So to use an analogy here, we're the ones who decide what we want. So we have the target, that's what we want to hit. And then we have our tool, we have our rifle. And then we have to use our rifle to hit the target that we want. But what people do in relationships quite frequently is, okay, they have what they want, the target, and then, they have the rifle, but they're like, hey, I don't want to learn how to use this thing. I'm going to give it to my partner over here. They will shoot it for me, better than I can, or whatever, whatever decision that makes a person not want to sort of take responsibility for their own desires. And then, they end up resenting the person because they're like, they may or may not hit the target. And then you're yelling at this person to do something, to give you the need that you can't seem to give to yourself. And then now it's like suddenly it's like their responsibility for for them to be a better marksman than you are with your own desire. And they may not even fucking know. Okay, you may have said, okay, I want to shoot this target over here, and then you communicate that to your partner. And they turn 180 degrees and they shoot some other target, and then you ask well, why are they shooting that target? And then they say, well, you told me to shoot the target. And you said, no, not that fucking target. I meant the fucking one over there. So anyhow, I'm going to pause it here for a second. Anyway, so what we need to do is learn how to shoot our own, use our own tools. So another way to describe this is, a slave. Now we're all kind of like slaves in our culture, whether we whatever, whether we like to think of ourselves as that or not. What I'm talking about is culturally, the reality is we're all free, to do what we want. But our culture, we have a deeply entrenched culture into the idea of slavery. And so we all sort of think like slaves. So how does a slave think? Well, a slave, does the work his master tells him to. And then, there's a contract. We don't think of it as a contract, but there's an expectation that the master will feed the slave, and, the bare minimum needs of the slave will be met. And so the slave stops listening to his own senses because he is in a relationship of dependency on the master. He has to be in this place at this time in order to be fed. And so, he may or may not resent his master, but, regardless of how he feels about being a slave, he's a slave, But he's not a slave because he is a person who's doing a service for another person free of charge. That's not why he's a slave. He's a slave because he has outsourced his needs onto the master. He's become dependent on the master for his own survival. And he has decided that the master is responsible for, giving him food, water, and shelter. And so, what happens when one day the master doesn't show up with the food and the water? The slave gets angry. It's like, where is my food? Where is my water? My master, why has my master abandoned me? And now the slave has abandonment issues. And so he's waiting. He waits 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and his master never shows up. And so eventually, he dies of starvation because he never paid attention to what his needs were. What he wanted was food, but he was disconnected from his body in order to, find the food and water that he wanted. So what we want, sort of exists in our environment, and what we need sort of exists within ourselves. So the slave is so disconnected from himself that he can no longer meet his own needs and fulfill and meeting his own needs with it, where the current of his body naturally wants to flow, like a baby naturally cries in order to get what it wants, which is the milk. The slave withers and dies because he's like, fuck that shit, I'm not going out there. I'm not going to find a new strategy. I am not going to pay attention to what my body wants, or what my body is calling to, what my needs are. I'm going to wait around for somebody else to give me, what I want. And so I'm going to resent them for not giving me what I need. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait to die until somebody else, brings me my food. Because there's no way that I can listen to my senses to find what it is I want in this world. So what a person needs, I'm saying here, I'm positing this, what a person needs is to pay attention to their body, to service them in acquiring, whatever it is that they want in the world. So I'm making a distinction between need and want. Need exists within us, and allowing our bodies to be natural and connected, to our will, to freely express our will. And in doing so, that is where we find the natural fulfillment, of our wants. But as soon as we turn our wants into, somebody else's responsibility, and then we relabel them as needs, then we're creating, a foundation for resentment and our own neglect. Anyhow, so I'll leave it there for now. I think I've somewhat adequately expressed what I was trying to communicate here. Have a good one.